Hello and welcome to episode 12 of DDK Talks Esports. Today's episode will feature YNK, and it's a very timely moment to speak with him. Of course, if you have been following the news, it was recently announced that he is to join MIBR as the main coach. A team that has not had a coach for a couple of years, and a team that has been seeing great struggles of late with interesting roster moves. And obviously the slump that they've been experiencing has not been pleasant, and it's been going on for a while. So they really do need somebody, and YNK is that guy. And if you look at this team on paper, Cold, Stewie, Tarek, Fallen, and Fur, you really expect big things, and perhaps YNK can be the difference. So we talk about exactly how his approach is going to be, and it is early days, of course. He has yet to really spend time with them or play out an event with them. But it is going to be interesting to hear exactly what he has to say. But first, I have some of you guys using the hashtag askddk, so we'll jump into that. At Nomadic Bears on Twitter asks, how must Cloud9 restructure in the coming months to take back and maintain the status of a top North American team? When should fans expect to see tournament results again? Well, Nomad, I think it's a very complicated question because Cloud9 obviously have been scrambling somewhat to get players, and they've got Stiko as a stand-in, and there's I think a big question mark as to whether Stiko can sort of remake himself as a player in some regards to fit into this roster as a stand-in, and that always carries the question as well, how much adaptation can you really create in the short term as a stand-in, when the new role is perhaps expected of you. So that's a huge question mark right there. I think, though, a big win for Cloud9 was to get Golden, because there has been an in-game leader crisis in Sweden for some time, and Golden actually, I would say, is, from a results perspective, perhaps has had the most success in Sweden as an in-game leader of late, in how he was able to transform Fnatic back to their former glory, back to their former identity as a team that really reveled and really succeeded at playing a very loose mid-round based style where you create chaos and then you use that individual skill to leverage the advantage, or rather you leverage the individual skill to create the advantage in these mid-rounds, because something that Fnatic were always incredible at was just having this almost psychic connection to one another, and just everybody understood exactly this crazy style of play that they would all be going for. They could all react at the drop of a dime to whatever situation was happening. And that level of confidence that they had in that was very characteristic of Fnatic. And Cloud9, I think, before all of the roster changes, the team that we saw win the major, they had some similar characteristics in their players at the very least. And much like the old Fnatic, they weren't incredibly strategic. So from that perspective, I feel like Golden could bring already an in-game leading style, despite again being quite a new in-game leader, that could actually work out for Cloud9. I think the issue mainly is how they're going to adapt the roles, because to really make that style very successful, you do need players like Stewie and Tarek, very versatile players that are very explosive and can do a lot of damage, have a lot of firepower. And that is really the question here. Can Cloud9 sort of adapt their roles to be able to achieve that? And, will Stiko be able to carry his weight in that regard as well? And I think, we owe it to every single player who jumps from one role to a very different role, whether or not that will be the case with Stiko. We owe it to them to see whether or not they can do it. I think it's too common for us to look at a player playing a specific role on a team, and then let's take Exist for example. Exist, when he stood in for FaZe, I think he really showed everybody once again when he stepped into the role of just being a fragger and a rifler. We saw that he was incredible at that role. He fit into it very easily, despite it being something that he had to readapt to and hadn't really been doing for quite some time. And I think this is something that, is the case for a lot of players. So I don't think we should really pigeonhole players too much, and we'll see as Stiko, what he can do as a stand-in, and whether it's going to be a short-term solution or if it will end up being a long-term one. But for Cloud9, it's definitely going to be very difficult, and I think it's going to be, I don't think we'll see anything huge from them until after the major. And after the major as well, we will also see perhaps the roster situation be a little bit easier on all of these pro teams who are currently, or top tier pro teams that are currently looking for new members to fill out a more ideal roster for themselves. So Oywin at OIWYN asks, I asked you the same question on stream, but if you can answer this more in depth, I would be grateful. How does a player that is not mechanically gifted, how should a player who's not mechanically gifted approach the game so he can be a better player than those who are more gifted? Well, I think this is, always the question is that, how much can you really get out of just effective practice? Because there's a huge amount of players who are very mechanically gifted that have a poor approach, and so they have a very poor level of consistency. There's many elements that come into being a great player, and one of them, of course, is just being a good human to play with. Like, having people want to play with you is really important. That social intelligence aspect, that the aspect of playing nice with others, is often much more rewarding than being someone that wants to win at any cost when you're trying to move up the ranks, because you want people to play with you and you want people to want you on their team, and that gives you more opportunities. And so that's one very important and not often talked about aspect of trying to make the difference, because everybody does likes to pick up that guy that has incredible mechanical skill, but there can be so many issues that can come along with that. Perhaps the player's somewhat toxic, perhaps his communication is not very good, perhaps his understanding of the game is not very good. And that can cause problems too, because that's a consistency issue, and it's a reliability issue. If you instead have the player that maybe is not quite as good mechanically, but you understand exactly how he's going to play the game, you understand that you can expect certain things from him, from his role, he has a greater deal of consistency. These things are very, very useful, and people pick up on it. So from that perspective, I think you can still get very good mechanics with an effective training modality. And it can be very different for a great number of people. It can be very individual as to how you achieve that. But I think one of the most important things is to make sure that you do at least meet the par. You're up to par on the mechanics, so you have a good setup. You put time and thought into your mousing style, whether that goes with the grip of the mouse and also whether that goes with the kind of mouse pad you use, the sitting style. Like, all these basic things are really important, and you need to find something that's very comfortable for you, and then you can engage in your practice on mechanics. And whether that's just practicing by supplementing the training with aimbots, which can work out very well, practicing specific flicks, short flicks, resets of the mouse, practicing movement, practicing everything very specifically. Or like on the podcast with Valde doesn't take this approach. He instead has a more holistic approach. He tries to focus on just playing good Counter-Strike and just relies on the hours that he puts in and the intelligence that he puts into every single game that he plays to cultivate good habits and to improve that way. And so you just really have to find out what works for you. But ultimately, having a very good understanding of the game is very important to consistency. And that's something that very mechanically gifted players often do not have. Due to the fact that it's somewhat of a burden of talent argument, where your talent is so great, you can rise up the ranks very quickly, but then you end up running into sort of blocks later on because you never got quite a good enough understanding of the game theoretically. So it's very difficult for you to understand exactly where your issues are, as opposed to the person who has put a lot of time into that. So focusing on all of the other things other than mechanics, I think can be a very important way to do that. And I think it's very possible. I think you can absolutely get to the professional level, absolutely, by just being a very smart player, just understanding everything that even goes into the mechanics. For example, let's say if you look at a player like Simple, his crosshair placement's not very good. Like, he understands the crosshair placement, but he's not always ready. But he doesn't need to be, because he's Simple. He's just that gifted. But for people who are not super gifted, you can still go very far with just having very good technique. Either way, I think that's about brings it to a close here for the askddk questions. Hashtag askddk, you can ask me stuff and I'll check it every so often. I try to let the questions build up at least, so that it's not a very short little segment here. But now we've gone over that, it's time to get into today's podcast with YNK. Okay, hello, YNK. Thank you for joining me, because you're a hero right now. I've had a hard day, but we made it work.
Yeah, we finally got there.
Yeah. So Yeah, Yanka caught me on the day where I've had 3 hours sleep. Just got back from LA a couple of days ago. The jet lag is kicking my ass, but we made it work, and this is really good because, as you said, like you're off to a boot camp tomorrow. So before we get into any of that, to be honest, there's a lot to talk to you about, especially considering, you were a staple of the analyst desk, and that whole area in of itself is a topic or area rich with subjects to go through. But what was the point then, being a staple of the analyst desk, if we to dive right into it, where you felt like, all right, now it's time to give it up for the moment and head on over to coaching?
Yeah, I think it was just the right moment for me to do so, because ever since I started doing events, even as an observer, I always had some sort of a goal set out. Early on, it was just to keep getting invited to more events, just keep observing, like do a good job. Then it was okay, I'm the go-to guy now for ESL to observe. Now I want to try and see if I can get myself on an analyst desk and see if I can do that, because I thought like I could. I thought there was a niche that I could fill, with something a bit more in depth. And then I started to do that. Then it was okay. I I want to now prove myself I can do this and get invited to more tournaments as an analyst. So in 2016, that really took off, and then it was, I want to do the final of ESL1 Cologne. I want to do a major or something like that. I want to work with every tournament I want E-League to maybe finally hire me, and when they do eventually hire me, I want to prove to them that they should have hired me from the start, and like have them invite me back every single tournament that they have. And I've sort of done all of that, and I found myself really like, my next challenge or my next goal wouldn't be related to the analyst desk, right? It would be maybe creating some content on the side, or like doing a bit more behind the scenes in terms of the broadcast or something along those lines. So there was nothing really left in terms of just being on camera talent, where I was like, yes, this is now the next thing I'm striving for. So the offer came in from MIBR. It got me thinking really, and I figured, yeah, I miss competing. This is a great team. I know the guys. I know that I won't be just a decoration in that team. That I will have my say, and that I felt like we could really be. I think a lot of things fell into place, even if my original idea was to finish the year doing the desk, and then maybe for 2019 make some sort of a decision. But I just couldn't pass up on an opportunity like this, really.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one, especially considering I think I looked it up for Zeus, and I think Zeus has coached, I think, maybe 62, 63 events or something over the last like 2 to 3 years, which obviously is a huge degree of experience from a coaching standpoint. And so, so there are definitely some veterans in there. Obviously, not everybody is available. I think Fallen mentioned that they, looked at Peacemaker and so on and so forth. And one of the advantages for you was, the aspect of, being a native English speaker and so on. But you have this unique aspect that, you've watched all the Counter-Strike probably more than anybody else. You have more of a macro perspective on the entire pro scene. And, for a lot of coaches, I imagine, surely it must be quite difficult to do that. Sure, you study, your opponents from time to time, but having a greater sense for what the overall picture looks like and having so many different reference points, is that a particular strength that you're looking to leverage moving into this role?
Absolutely. I really think I watched more CS in the last 3 years than any living being on this planet, with the amount of events and games I've done. And I 100% agree. I think it gives you a perspective, because simply you've seen so many times a certain situation repeat itself and unfold, and you just know, like, if we do this, if we do X and they're doing Y, we're going to lose the round 90% of the time, unless someone makes a mad play. And I agree also completely that coaches, and I think of course, it's normal, as a coach, you're focused on your own team first and foremost, and then you're focused on your opponents. You're not really going to care, what Navi and I don't know, mouse sports are doing if they're on the other side of the bracket until you get to the maybe potentially final and meet one of the two teams, right? You're not going to watch that game in the quarterfinal. You're going to watch the quarterfinal that's on your side of the bracket, and so whoever wins, you have some data on them, data, or however you guys say it. But so I definitely think so. That's something that I think I can really help the guys on the CS side of things. Like, I think there are a couple of concepts and just certain things within the game that teams just aren't using enough, or they're not using it at all. And I think that could be an edge, a sort of a couple of fresh ideas, a fresh perspective that I can bring to the team.
So I think it might be the case that a lot of people might look at that as the obvious reason why you may add to the team, and the team has already this sort of strong leadership foundation in Fallen, sort of the grandfather of Brazilian CS, although maybe not grandfather considering he's kind of young. So in his 20s.
Godfather.
Okay, Godfather. There we go. But I feel like obviously you're much more than just that, and what do you think other than that glaring most obvious advantage of bringing you on that that you can offer to the team to change things? Obviously coaching is not something that you just got an offer and like, oh yeah, I'll coach, but it's clearly something you've been thinking about for a while. So do you feel like it's something that it's somewhat of a calling for you?
I think that remains to be seen, right? I think 100% I would have coached at some point in my career, because I just think, from watching so much CS, and I just think that I can do a good job at it, right? I wouldn't go into it if I wasn't sure that I want to do it or not, and all of that stuff. So I think for me, the reason why I got into it right now, and why I think amongst other things, the guys went from, it's a team that didn't have a coach for 2 years, right? After Zeus, they had no coach. They didn't want one, and arguably maybe they needed one at different points in time. I think a big deal is, sure, they've seen me on the desk and seen the way I talk about the game and some of my thoughts, and we've also talked at events just privately about stuff and so on. But I think it's not just about the CS. I think they can relate to me and see that it's just a guy just like them. It's not someone who's going to march in and demand things from them in terms of, I want you to play this way, I want you to play that way, or anything like that. I think they realize that we can have a pretty good like cooperation in that sense, and that it would be mutual working together, and not just one side or the other saying this is how we're going to do things and that's it.
So do you think that's, I mean, we've mentioned Zeus a couple times already, and I think he's a great example. I think, of course, what he's been able to achieve with Team Liquid has been impressive. But would you say that it's very difficult to even sort of know what to expect or how to compare yourself, or to find some kind of reference for this job? Because I feel like in Counter-Strike, the coaching role seems to be by far the most ambiguous as to the responsibilities and maybe even the impact.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I'm not, I'm fully aware that there's much more to coaching than just CS, right? And practicing with the team and, implementing stuff. I think a lot of it actually that can improve a team is things outside of the server, right? I've said it in a couple of interviews that for this team, I really want to, reintroduce, so to speak, some of the things that got them to being the best team in the world, right? They're still very hardworking. It's just that I think because some of the issues within the roster, that people got demotivated a little bit. They weren't as focused and as they used to be, and I think that's also normal, and that's why I think here we have a great opportunity really to, with this fresh start of sorts. I'm coming in. Tarek was also just recently added to the team. I think we have a very good opportunity to just start everything like that way again. Introduce some discipline, do things the right way when it comes to preparation and practice, and really make the most out of it. Because I am a guy who truly believes that when it comes to those big games, officials, tournaments, those big moments, you're not somehow magically going to come up with a certain thing and that's going to win you the game. I think it's going to be the things that you've done 100 times over in practice. And to me, sometimes pressure comes from being unprepared, right? Because you're not sure what you're going to do in this situation. It's 14-14. Of course, it's more when the game is close and when it's nearing its end. But if it's a situation within the game, with the money and everything and the map and all that sort of stuff, and you recognize the situation, the scenario, and you know what the answer is because you've done it 100 times in practice and everything, well, then you're not feeling that pressure. You're feeling, yeah, this is what we do. This is what we've done 100 times before, and there's no reason for any of us. There's no reason for in-game leader to feel nervous or feel the pressure calling something. There's no reason for players to feel the pressure executing it, right? Maybe not like no pressure, but not as much. That's what I mean. So I think by being very well prepared, I think that's, for me as a coach, is going to be the number one thing, right? Like, because as a coach, you can't talk in the game. Like, you only have timeouts, halftime, and the warm-up, right? So I can't really mid-round call stuff or in freeze time every round tell them what to do. That's why I think my main duty is to prepare the team so well and give Fallen as the in-game leader enough tools that I don't need, even if I could, I wouldn't need to talk, and they would always have options of what they could do. And obviously sometimes you call a timeout, you see something and you say, hey, maybe we're missing this, or you just call a timeout to calm people down. But mostly I think it's about being really well prepared.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the words, or used the words culture a few times, and I think it's a really interesting one because obviously it's, as you say, like one of the best ways to prepare a team or a person. I mean, it's the character argument, isn't it? In real life, if you come to any obstacle in your real life, you can't be prepared for everything that's thrown at you, but you can have the best attitude, and that's going to prepare you the best to deal with those things. And I always wondered about how this sort of leader of men versus in-game leader dynamic worked in Counter-Strike, because I always felt like being a leader of men and being an in-game leader, obviously two completely different things. For example, we could see that, let's say, taking Happy, for example, for many years, definitely a really smart Counter-Strike player. I'm sure he's very good at making calls, but definitely not the type of person to inspire and lead his teammates. And I think it's definitely a very mature quality and something that it's hard to ask of for players who have such limited experience in life. I mean, it's a very rare quality, and it's really interesting because looking at this, and you mentioned there's 2 years without a coach, and obviously Fallen is amazing and remarkable for many reasons, and I think perhaps is one of the closest players you could perhaps ascribe the quality of being sort of a leader of men to in all of Counter-Strike history. But at the same time, there must be a huge burden when things aren't going well, and when everything is going well, it's obviously going to be a lot easier. But the slump, it comes for everyone at some point or another, and I think this is one of the most interesting aspects from a coaching perspective, because I do think that is something that Zeus, like from the outside, it looks like Zeus has been able to do well with his team, because again, another thing that we can't really expect of players, and perhaps is not even efficient to ask of them, is that they're very socially intelligent, they're very aware of how their teammates are, and they can calibrate themselves so that the social environment is perfect at all times, and so on and so forth. So how do you instill, as a coach out of the game, this culture, into the team so that they are so prepared? And, what kind of characteristics do you put upon them? And how do you also, with your 4 timeouts and your nice every so often, how do you make it work when they're in the game on the server?
Yeah, I think for me that's super important. And I agree it's different, in-game leader, leader of men, and it's no secret. Why would Stewie come to a full Brazilian lineup and be the only, English speaker, and then later why would Tarek come to that team and maybe not go to some other team? Well, there are two main reasons: Fallen and Cold, right? Like, you have the best player in the world the last 2 years, and you have, you know, one of the definitely best in-game leaders during that same period of time, who's opping at the same time and doesn't have a coach. I mean, to me, how Fallen does these things, I don't know, man. Like, that's insane in itself. So I think being that guy, Fallen or Cold, I think that has a certain, you are also more accountable and have more responsibility than, for example, Fur, right? Like, to give a specific example. And I think that's you as a leader, or maybe being the best player on the team. Everyone's going to look up to you, and everything starts from you. I think for me the most important piece is always the in-game leader, and especially Fallen, because he's the opper too. I'll because you set the tone for the whole team in a game. How you sound, what you call, like, if you call something and you sound like you're hesitating or you're not sure, what's that going to make your players think? Well, shit, does he even know what he's calling? Like, what are we doing here? All of those things. And I think when you have the proper attitude, that transfers to all of the players. Everyone's like, yeah, like, let's fuck them up. This is like the thing. Like, this is what's going to win us the game now. And for someone like Cold, on the other side of things, if you're the guy who's always first when we have like a meeting, or we have breakfast at 9, you show up 10 minutes before 9, and you're always the first guy there. For a young guy like Stewie, for also, I mean, Tarek is not much older than him either. For those guys who came to the team and they see that and they say, wow, man, it's no wonder this guy was the best player in the world, the last 2 years. Look at how he's doing things. Like, he's always, on time. He's always like working hard. He's always like doing his thing. He's like, you're leading by example, basically. And I think that's going to be one of my main goals, like, to set that sort of a culture where everyone is like, okay, like, we have to work hard. It's difficult now. You have all these great teams. Yes, we have great players ourselves, but we need to work hard to go back to consistently being at the top and always being a contender for tournaments and lifting trophies. Again, it's not going to fall into our lap or anything like that. And I think that's where you need to have the discipline. That's where you need to have the approach and the attitude, to do things the right way. And sure, I mean, me and they know me. I'm the guy who's always like, work hard, play hard. If we do well, we go to a tournament, we, win a tournament or something. Like, go fucking have the next like 2 days off, no practice, no anything. Let's just enjoy the moment, because this is what you work for, right? This is why you put all the hard work in. So that's the way I see things. That's the way I want to establish things within the team. And of course, you have different personalities. Some guys work harder than other guys. Some guys like to watch their opponents themselves and pick up things. Other guys want someone to give them like a scouting report, and I'm fine with that. You can't have, I don't think it's even normal or even good to have all 5 players be like watching like the VODs all the time and everyone's having ideas. I think you just have guys who are playing better and everything when you don't burden them with too much shit, and that's when they can like perform at their highest. And you have guys who like to be involved in everything and they like to theory craft, and I think that's also very important. And I think after talking to the guys, in Atlanta, I think there's going to be a good balance of just that. Even though I'm in a weird situation where I didn't really have a vacation, I was theory crafting a lot, like thinking about stuff. And I have all these ideas, but I haven't really gotten to work with the team at all. So I'm very excited about it to see how things are going to, kick off when we actually get to work.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how it all turns out. Obviously, it's just incredible every time you just look at the team on paper and you predict anybody else to win the match, which has obviously been happening recently. As the slump has continued and the roster changes and so on and so forth is to be expected. But I'm sure everyone is pretty confident that it's going to be a top 3 team in no time.
Thanks, Dan.
But it is really interesting because I think you sort of broached the topic that I was curious about, and it is quite difficult, I feel like, to understand like every single one of your players, because obviously some players are much more adaptable than others, and this is, I guess, going to start the discussion about how do you approach that? Because do you see MIBR as a team that is fairly solidified in the roles, or is it the opposite? Because I think from some of the interviews I've seen, at least, the kind of tone that I'm getting from them is that, okay, Stewie and Tarek very adaptable. Then you have commentary. I think it may have been Nitro or someone from Liquid, maybe Elige, saying it's a twist. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's quite clear that it's a struggle right now for Stewie and Tarek. Struggling to sort of find their feet, being players that could just do whatever the hell they wanted on Cloud9, being the star players, being the aggressive players, and now it's a very different dynamic. And I think that it's definitely a mark of a great player to be very adaptable, but I think there are players as well that they are absolutely the best in the world at something, but maybe being adaptable isn't one of them. And how do you know if a player is that way, and how are you looking to manage this moving forwards? And again, you don't have too much time with the major coming up, but what is your approach to sort of figure the roles situation out, and how rigid is that word even, roles? It might even be a bit too rigid.
Yeah, I think people overestimate it a little bit at times, having specific roles. Like, sure, like you can tell that in some of the situations, like when Taco was on the team, he would go with Cole and he would like create some space for him and put him in a good position, but that wasn't necessarily the case all the time. And you look at someone like Stewie, for example, I mean, the guy did so many different things in Cloud9. He was in-game reading, he was entry fragging, he was lurking, he was opping. Like he did at different periods in time. He had so many different roles. So I think he's super versatile now. Would you argue that he would be, better used if, or he would maybe perform better if you build the game around him and make him the focal player and, have him set him up and let him be aggressive? And does that mean he can't be a good player if he's doing some other stuff that benefit the team more as a whole? No, I don't believe that. I think he can do a lot of things really, really well, and I think that's the strength of him as a player. And he's still young and he gets frustrated at times. He's highly competitive and gets frustrated when things aren't going well, like they haven't. But for me, the argument, for example, with him or even with Tarek is super simple. Like, why did you come to this team? And the answer is definitely not going to be, I wanted to be the star player. No, it's, I wanted to play with these guys because they're legendary. They're proven winners, and I wanted to come here to win titles, and play with guys like Fur and Cold and Fallen, right? So that's why you came to the team, and that's going to require you making some compromise. Don't get me wrong, I plan to have all of the guys involved in different situations. And you look at the scenario where you're playing a default and players are spread around the map and a mid-round call comes in. Sometimes you're going to be the first guy coming in to set up somebody else and create space. Sometimes you're going to be the guy that's being set up, right? You can't play CS with strict rules like that, where whenever we're going to hit a site, you're going, Fur is going to be the first guy going in. Like, it's simply impossible. Your round is going to fall apart so many times. So I have a couple of ideas how to have enough variety and have different plays where, maybe in a sense, like, keep some of the guys happy by not having to do, like, some shitty things like all the time, because it is the case when in some rounds, or in a specific type of rounds or something like that, you are going to have a guy who's going to be, the bitch, and has to, like, throw the grenades or something along those lines, right? But that doesn't even, for me, it's like, yeah, you're setting up someone else with the nades, and then he can go and get a kill and die, and then again you come into play and you have to finish the round or whatever. I really believe that if we can implement some of the things that I have in mind, and if the guys are, you know, uh, truly motivated, like I think they will be, they're going to have so much fun playing. And hopefully we're going to have, I am counting on having good results as well. People are not going to care if they're 5-20, and we're winning 16-6, for example, right? Because yeah, you're doing that, but for me at least, and okay, I can't say that everyone feels the same way, but for me, when I had most fun playing was when I see, as an in-game leader, for example, that I out mind game my opponent, and now I outplayed him. I predicted, I read him, I knew what he was going to do, and I set my team up perfectly to counter that, and we win the round. I might, die like Canoe, but if I see that happening, if I see that we're dominating the other team, I don't really care about, personal stats or what I'm doing. So I feel like that's going to be the most important thing, especially for them now, because they did have a slump where they weren't really, close to the level they're used to being at, where they're always, in the top four, always in the finals, always within reach of that trophy.
Is communication going to be a big issue or is it just a short-term obstacle or a long-term obstacle? I know at E-League you were sort of standing behind them or not standing behind them, but like
Yeah.
sitting in close enough
Sitting in
proximity to
front.
hear them.
Yeah. Sitting in front of them. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be an issue when it comes to CS. From what I've, like, heard, it was, when Stewie was the only, native English speaker in the team, it was actually Bolt who was struggling the most with communicating in English. The other guys, they have, fairly good English. I mean, yeah, sure, some of them are maybe not as comfortable, and they don't really want to give interviews, but that's you standing in front of a camera or sitting, and everyone's going to look at you and say, look at his broken English, or blah 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 blah. For CS, like, it's just about being able to quickly give, like, the most crucial piece of information, and that's it. And maybe there's going to be a bit of things like, how do we call this spot, how do we call that spot, but I am fairly confident that it's not going to be something that's going to hinder our game that much.
I know, one thing from a communication perspective, perhaps the only other valuable thing, as opposed to what you just described, which is, quickly and clearly communicating, the information that's happening in the game, is obviously something that goes somewhat back to maybe the culture discussion, in so far as having that player that can help to lighten the spirits, lift the mood. And it's difficult, again, as you mentioned, for a coach to do such a thing with only 4 timeouts. And so some teams, it seems as though they really struggle with this. However, do you feel like that's just a failure in preparation ahead of time, or do you feel like it's an instrumental component to a team to have one guy that can just be a bit of a jester, as it were, even?
Wait, so you mean, like, is it important to have a guy who's going to, like, lift the spirits or lift the mood or something like
Yeah,
that?
does it matter? And is that something that you feel like you have on MIBR?
Yeah, well, I think in theory you wouldn't want to have a team that gets down on themselves like that. And I think that was the strength of the Brazilian core for a long time. We used to say it on broadcasts all the time, like, you can never count these guys out. Like, they are, never going to, like, fully tilt or anything along those lines. They're always going to be fighting, to come back. And how many times have we seen insane comebacks? I mean, some of your most iconic moments came from their games when, they were down, like, incredible numbers, and still managed to come back and win the whole thing. So I think it's always good sure, to have someone who's maybe going to crack a joke and maybe, just kind of ease the tension if you lose a silly round, and you're going to lose silly rounds. But in theory, and that's what I'm going to insist on from day one, I'm going to telling the guys, there's no round that you can't win. Like I think simply that they're so good as players, so skilled, that three USPs, like two deagles and two flashes, like you can win that round. So I want to instill that in their subconscious almost, that whatever silly round we lose, and you're going to lose stupid rounds, miscommunication, people fuck up, the other teams are really good as well, they're going to force you to make mistakes sometimes. Your mindset should not be like, I want them to have that, like you're not even thinking about it, you're just thinking, how much money do we have? Are we buying? Are we not buying? On to the next round straight away. Because I've seen too many times teams lose a game because of one round, because they were tilted, they were thinking about it. It was like crucial round or something, a reset round, and they end up losing the next 5 rounds because of it, right? Or they make a rash decision to buy when they should have just ecoed and then bought the next round. And you see that happen when teams are even ahead, like they have control of the game, and it's far from lost or anything along those lines, and they just mentally kind of put themselves in this hole. So a jester or something like those lines, sure, you always have guys who even outside of the game and are fooling around a bit more and all of that. But for me personally, I would prefer the style where now we're playing, it's down to business, and everyone's just focused on doing their job, and you're not getting down or anything, you're not thinking about you're just playing until the game is over. You're just trying every single round to do what's in your power to help the team win.
Yeah, I really like that mentality. I think it's really inexplicable sometimes when, because I actually experienced this at the beginning of Quake 4 for whatever reason. I was a part of a team, and we were like, it was a very, very competitive moment in Quake, and you had all the best players from UT, from all the different Quakes coming over, and everyone thought it'd be the next big thing. And for whatever reason, my team was like the best for this 4 to 6 month period, and we couldn't lose to anyone. And I remember this feeling distinctly, that because I was working, so I was getting like 5 hours of sleep a night, because I was doing the kind of ROPS thing where you go to school and then you well, although actually ROPS actually got really good grades, whereas I I wasn't getting good grades, but I was getting 5 hours of sleep a night and just practicing as late as I possibly could, and I knew that I was in the best shape I could possibly be in, and even though like there would be these spots where we would be playing a team, and because we were so used to crushing everyone, it'd be really weird to suddenly be losing, and have a moment when it feels like you're going to lose the game, or like all the information suggests objectively that you're likely to lose this game. But I remember there was like this because there's two ways you can go with that at that point, and you either think, oh, we're in a position where we have a disadvantage, or I remember thinking and finding this an amazing feeling, because we had so many reference points of never losing and just being the better team and being the better players. In my head, I'm like, well, even though this looks really, really bad, I actually still know 100% that we're going to win this game. And it was a very weird feeling, and it was only something that was possible because we'd had so much success, and it's somewhat of a snowball effect, I think, in that way.
Oh, I know the feeling 100%. I mean, I had that feeling early on in CS:GO within our own region, because we were just, we were playing on a different level than anyone else, and we were putting in the work, and we just knew whatever happens in the game, we're going to end up winning this game. Like, if we're down 14-6, we're going to win this game. Like, you had that feeling. And interestingly enough, I had a talk with Crims in Atlanta one night, and we were talking about it. I was talking about, we were talking about Fnatic in 2015 when they were so dominant, and I was saying like it was such a pain in the ass to talk about you guys, because you were so good individually and you were so confident and everything. And he just said, yeah, like it was so easy to play. Like that year, we came into every single game with the feeling like we're winning this game. Doesn't matter the map, doesn't matter the opponent. We're down 12-3 at halftime. Like, we're coming back. We're switching, to the CT side of train or something. We're going to bring this back easily. And that's when we talk about, confidence and how big of a role it plays when it comes to tier 1 CS, that you have that mental fortitude. So I agree 100% that that's, super important, and that's something that I also want the team to have. I want them to have that, healthy dose of arrogance, of cockiness, of like, yeah, we're better than you, and we're going to play that way, and we're going to put our foot down, and it's down to you to fight your way out of it if you can, right? Because I don't think this team has a reason to feel inferior, or these players, to any other team in the world, right? And I think having that sort of an attitude is definitely going to help you in some of those big games, and just setting the tone really for your opponents, and maybe also, instill some fear into them.
Yeah, I always found it really, really fascinating, from like the psychology angle, because, for example, the way that our brains work is really interesting. If there was like a picture on the wall, and I said to you, okay, I want you to stare at this picture, and I want you to remember all the stuff that's red. And then when the time is over, then I sort of switch it on you and I say, okay, tell me all the things in the picture that was blue. And it's very unlikely that you'll be able to actually answer, because our brains are, they just pick up what they think is valuable. So you filter all the other information out, which is really interesting from like a pressure perspective, because again, you have all this data coming into your mind, and you've played the game, so many times, and you are in this spot where it feels really obvious that all the data just stacks up. It's like, well, I know Counter-Strike, and in that sort of model, in putting all the data into it, I should lose this situation. And then, of course, you start to think what the implications of losing the situation might be, or maybe you start to think of other information that makes your life more difficult, like what's on the scoreboard and all this kind of stuff. And it's really interesting from the perspective of sort of being able to sort of create like what I like to call kind of like a constructive self-delusion, being in a spot where it's objectively maybe unwinnable, but you still have 100% confidence that you can win that situation. And is this something that you yourself, you're going to focus a lot on with the players, like all these sports psychology elements, or are you going to have some help coming in as well on that angle, because that's obviously very common these days with big teams?
Yeah, I am. I think it's a massive part of like being successful when it comes to, tier 1 and if you want to be a championship level team, because you come to a point where all these teams play like really good CS, right? So it's about who has them, and when they break down, it's usually because of mentality issues or something along those lines. You look at obviously FaZe versus Cloud9 at the major, right? Like, that's, sure, it's CS related in a sense that FaZe was doing the wrong things on their T side, blah 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 blah, but that's came from them not being prepared enough mentally to react to that sort of a situation. So I will have there's Doug Gardner. He is the player performance director for Immortals. So it's like, all of their teams, like the Overwatch team, CS team, Dota team, and all that stuff. And he has a lot of experience with just coaching in general, and like working with athletes, working with competitors, and I think he is going to be a great help in that department. We had like a good talk in Atlanta, although it was just, for that one night basically. But, we share a lot of views on how you need to approach players, and some of the things you need to really instill or insert into them, that they need to like think in a certain way, and get used to doing things a certain way, because that's where results come from, that's where consistency comes from, and that's where results come from. So that's going to be maybe I think that's going to be a bigger challenge personally, to do that rather than set up the strategies and the styles and like the CS stuff. Not to sound too arrogant myself, but I think that the CS related stuff is going to go relatively smoothly, and the major focus is going to be on that psychology side of things, where you want to get the team used to doing things a certain way. And from that, if you manage to do that, that's going to make your practice, that's going to make the CS related things so much more efficient. Like the work you put into that is going to be so much more efficient, and you're going to be able to do things a lot faster, right? You're going to be able to get more things done in the same amount of time.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of, efficiency. There has to be an obvious mistake, I think, perhaps made by many teams, which is perhaps putting the team in a position where perhaps they're experiencing too much in the way of diminishing returns. Like, you put, like, if you put those extra 10 hours in when the players already practice a lot and it's just focused on the mechanics or maybe the strategy, maybe that extra 10 hours is not only like an opportunity cost issue because of the time that it takes away from the players to just relax and sort of feel like they're further away from any sort of burnout situation, but also from the perspective of like for example with this, like you can't expect every single player to be perfect from like a social aspect. So that's why the coaching works out really well. You don't have to spend hundreds of hours trying to transform this human being that's very inefficient, but instead you can just sort of micromanage certain aspects and put the time in the right spots. And I think putting the time in the right areas seems to be a really big issue, and it's obviously not made any easier by the schedule that we have in Counter-Strike. So we have teams, I mean, in the past, I think Fnatic, as you mentioned them, especially in their dominant era, they had that crazy mindset, and they were one of the first teams that, in an era where everyone was going into team houses and so on, they were like, screw it, we don't need to do that. They obviously weren't putting as much time in a lot of different areas that maybe other teams, their competitors, were, but they got so much back from putting the time into the right places, even if that was rest. And so, Astralis are also a team that really focuses on these things. So, like, what is your opinion of that? Because obviously, skipping tournaments, that starts to come into the discussion when we're talking about this.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that teams need to start doing more, like setting their schedules properly, because look at it. I'm going to be away, since I leave tomorrow, for 7 weeks, I think, almost exactly. And the team as well, obviously. And that's 7 weeks where you're not going home, like to where your base is or whatever. We're not gonna go to LA at any point in time. It's like boot camp, one tournament, straight to the next tournament, into another boot camp, into the major, into another tournament, right? That's insane when you think about it. Like, it's a really good thing that there's that little time, before now. I mean, before the first tournament and before the major, where you can like have a boot camp, and that's like where you can actually put just focus on practicing and not have to worry about officials or anything. But after that period, the leagues are going to start, and you're going to have more tournaments, and that's what we've been saying on broadcasts as well. Like, how can these teams be motivated to practice when the other side of the night off, when they arrive home, and the next day they have to play like 2 maps at the very least, or 4 maps of official online games, and you have that 3 out of the 5 days in that week, and then you're traveling again to another tournament. So where is the time to have good practice? Like, people need to be focused on practice. You need to be concentrated. You need to think about what you're doing. Otherwise, you're wasting your time, right? So I think that's the problem, and it's something that the team also has plans to try and create a better schedule. Because what's the point in, even when you talk about how you schedule practice, what's the point in playing 5 maps in a row, map after map after map after map? What are you achieving unless you maybe have, a coach writing everything down, and then you're maybe replaying some situations? No, I think, again, the way you schedule practice, you find an opponent and you schedule like multiple maps with them, right? It's easier that way for everyone. It's more efficient. But for me, ideally, I don't think it's possible to do like 1 map and then talk it through, but maybe something where you do 3 times 2 maps in a row, right? And you do 2 maps, and then you have an hour block where you just discuss those 2 maps, and make notes and say, okay, this is what was good, this is what was bad. We need to like work on this coming into the next series. And then you do another block, and then you see, okay, did people like, are they reacting? Are they realizing? Are they repeating those mistakes? Then you go over it again. Then you do the last two maps, and that was your practice for the day, because you need to reflect on what you've been doing, so you can say, these things are working for us, these are not, the calls are good, this call is bad, this call is good, or we need to execute this call better, and so on and so on. And that's how you get better, not just by massing games and like massing scrims. And I think that's the problem we're going to have, because we need a lot of games. Like, we need to play a lot of just practice games on multiple maps, because they've lost some identity when it comes to their map pool. They've only just brought Tarek. They're not sure if even, are we giving him the right spots on T side, CT side? Can we do this a little bit better? So we will need to go through a lot of trial and error, but also, you need to play a lot of maps, is what I'm trying to say. But that in itself doesn't necessarily mean you're having good practice. So it's going to be a bit difficult with the limited time that we have to get everything done in that sense.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. I think there's always this weird judgment that seems to come across, and it seems to be in a discussion when teams have been together for a month and people are like, oh, it's not, they should have everything together by now. They've been together for ages, and I can sort of understand why some people think that, because obviously the sort of turnaround, the roster turnarounds in Counter-Strike is kind of nuts. Sometimes a team will only be together for maybe like 4 or 5 months, so that could end up being 20% or 25% of the total time that team's been together that first month. But obviously that's 7 maps, that's 14 sides, that's a lot of shit to go through. But speaking of which, I don't think that there should surely be any worry if once you start to figure things out, that there will be any teams that could be an issue, except maybe Astralis or FaZe. And so you have the players to be able to deal with all of these challenges, but Astralis right now, I think, are in their very own discussion when it comes to how well they play Counter-Strike. So is this something you're even considering at this point? How you would approach Astralis, or maybe model the team in some way after Astralis, or what is your opinion of all that?
Not really. I'm not thinking about, okay, how do we beat Astralis? I'm just right now focused on setting up like our own game, setting up the team, and like getting them really back into shape. When I look at Astralis, I think they do a lot of things great. I think that's why they're the best team in the world. I mean, their approach to practice and preparation and their attention to detail, I think, is what separates them from a lot of the other things, and that's something that I would very much like to replicate. I mean, that approach to practice and the attention to detail. But I think also, sure, you would like more time, but I think things are easier a bit now. These players have been playing for a very long time. Things like knowing the grenades on all the maps, knowing the timings, knowing the angles. Like, you don't need to learn that stuff really, and I think that helps speed things up, right? That everyone is just knows so much about the game and is so good that you're not going to have to go through those things. It's just about setting up the team as a whole, and I think that's going to be one of the main strengths of this team, that you have 5 guys who all understand the game on a very high level. And when you were talking about communication, is it going to be an issue? I don't think it's going to be a huge problem because of that, as one of the reasons that you don't need to give a lot of information to someone. When people understand the game on a high level, you don't need to explain things to them. When we play sometimes, and someone, you were giving a call, and then people ask you, well, where is he now, or where is he exactly, or this or that. That's something that you can't give a call. People can move, people can do different things, but if you understand the game on a high level, and I give you some sort of a call, well, you already know in the back of your head, sure, like, he's there, but there's three things that he's most likely going to do, and I'm going to try and make a read what's going to be the one he's going to go for, and we'll see what happens, right? So in that sense, you give people comms, and they can fairly confidently create a sort of a picture in their head of what's going on in the round, right? Like, you're playing maybe T side, you're going for apps control or Inferno, and you hear a call from your teammate who's like down banana or river saying, "The banana smoke, 3 nades, 2 mollies," something like that. He doesn't, that's a sign for you. Basically, you can go and take apps control like with more freedom. You maybe don't need to use all the utility you usually use, because, well, there's a very slim chance they're going to go 3B early and also play 2 apps. That's like just hyper aggression, where even if you die, that gives your team so much info, they can just run up mid and trade on A, and you can still win the round. Like, it's things like that I believe where communication really with players who have high game sense, they get so much more information from less comms, if that makes a lot of sense, where you obviously have guys who are still very good players but maybe don't have such high game sense, and their reactions are maybe a bit slower in that sense, like slower to react to situations developing. And that's where I truly believe it's maybe a similarity that this team can have to that Fnatic of 2015, where you would see them just be so good to reacting on things happening on the map, even if they have a 4v4 as CTs. JW made an aggressive play and died 1-for-1. Your CT, that's not a benefit for you, but it's a benefit for Fnatic, because they're just so much better than you at understanding the game. When they have a 1v1 fight somewhere, because of that, because it's a 4v4, it's not a 50-50 fight, it's a 70-30 fight in their favor, because they just are expecting you to be somewhere, and you don't maybe have that same expectation that they're going to come to some spot on the map or something along those lines.
So, I brought up Astralis, and do you think that Astralis, let's say if every top 8 team had the exact same approach, the exact same support structure in the team, the exact same sort of efficiency to how and where they put the time into the game, do you think that the gap would close very, very quickly? Do you think that's actually the main difference, and that the players are great, but there's no reason why they should be doing that much better than anyone else from a player perspective? Is it all in that approach?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's obvious that the reason why they're so great is because how well they work right now as a team. And sure, their individuals are also firing on all cylinders. You have guys like Glaive, with the in-game leader being the MVP, and stuff like that, putting insane numbers. And I think that confidence and that individual performance comes from their teamwork, right? Because at almost any given point in time, you are the one making the plays, and you know what you're doing. You don't have to do random things, you don't have to guess. Like, you just have so much confidence in the things that you've practiced, and how well you work as a team, that coming into every fight, coming into every round, you feel like you have the upper hand. And I think if all teams had that's what we used to say even last year with Astralis. Yeah, they play like the best team Counter-Strike maybe, but they don't have that X factor that maybe FaZe has, or SK had, or now that you say maybe Navi has, in terms of their individuals sometimes just being able to break the rules and do insane things. And I'm not saying that the players on Astralis maybe couldn't do the same things, but that's not the way they play. And sure, they're trying to add a little bit of that so they can be a bit more unpredictable, and give their players some more freedom, which is another reason why they're so good, that they're not maybe as predictable as they were last year. So I still think that just with some of the talent and some of the other things, if they would add that level of dedication and hard work and practice and focus, and just doing things the right way, I think most definitely that gap would shrink very, very quickly.
It's definitely an exciting prospect because I feel like we shouldn't really be too far away from a world where everybody sort of catches on, and that obviously makes for more competitive and better Counter
I,
Strike for
I
everyone.
mean,
So
I mean, how ridiculous is it that this is even a topic of discussion, right? Like, if only the other best teams in the world were as serious or as hardworking as Astralis. I mean, that's something in my mind that should be, a given, and that's where I think that some of these players, more so than the organizations, because players still have a lot of power and a lot of say in everything. I think that's where they're really lagging behind with their salaries, or where the scene is in general, and all of that stuff. And you can't fully blame them for that because things have been moving so fast. And I don't think any of these guys, they're still not that generation where people are coming into CS to be as a career. They start playing it to be a professional player. No, everyone started playing for fun. It was a great game. Then they got better. Then they started competing, and now they're getting thousands of dollars in salary, and they're traveling the world and playing for even more thousands of dollars in prize money, right? And the approach from the players and their attitude hasn't really kept up with all these things around them. And I think that's why you see sometimes teams not being as good when it comes to practice, or not being as serious or as disciplined. And that's why I was saying, like, that's going to be one of my main things. And actually, I mean, this team is the best one when it comes to that, right? That's what made them great. In 2015, 2016, they were notorious for their hard work and their attention in practice. Like, stories on Reddit, like the guy from a open team says they practiced against Luminosity at the time, and they were like playing super serious and like trying things out. And even if it was like a 28-2 blowout in practice, right? So I don't think I'm going to have really a tough time, implementing that. I think the guys actually wanted, from talking to them, the impression I got is that they want to be coached, right? And I think that's great, and I think that's going to make my life a whole lot easier.
yeah, definitely, definitely an incentive for sure. Like all the failure recently, it
Yeah,
will
absolutely.
make them more coachable. So if you could sit down in a room and have a couple hours with any other Counter Strike coach, for the purposes of learning from them and their experience, because you respect them so much, who would it be and why? And also the same question to any coach in conventional sports, because I know you're a big fan of that as well.
Well, that's kind of a tricky one, because these guys in CS, they're my rivals now. And if I were to think like, oh, this guy can teach me something, well, that's kind of counterintuitive in itself, even though it's true. I mean, people have more experience and everything. Shit, I didn't expect this, Dan. But
You
I
can look
think
at it from
no,
like before you. Okay.
no, yeah, I think it would be Zonic, because he's one of the guys who actually has more um, authority, or like more control of the team, coming from the organization, right? He has or more power. That's the best word to use. Like, he has more power over the team. Like, he can bench someone. He can do things like that. So it would probably be talking to him about not about CS, but about managing, personalities and all of that, because they went through things where they were thinking in 2015 about removing Zipix, and then he became the best support player in the world, or the best role player in the world, for a while, and still a great player. So maybe about things like that, and either that or to Zeus, because he knows the guys personally, right? I mean, he's been with them on the team and just that, but I doubted he would be giving me any tips about that now. And when it comes to actual sports, I've been doing some research when I realized I was going to coach, and I've been doing some reading and like some literature on guys like Bill Belichick, because I really got hooked into the NFL. all of that stuff. And yeah, I think it would probably be someone like him, because it's such a massive squad that you're running, right? And it's like so many players and so many guys. And how do you instill that culture and that attitude I'm talking about, not in 5 guys, but it's a 53-man roster, I think, or a 52-man roster, and you get everyone to be that way, and to do it. And I just love that philosophy of, you're just doing your job. There's no magic to, the Patriots winning so many Super Bowls, and even being in so many Super Bowls without winning all of them, right? Like, whenever you talk to them in very few interviews or documentaries where you actually can get Belichick to like give you any real stuff, it's always about just like doing your job, getting better each day, like attention to detail and all that stuff. And I really believe in that philosophy, right? As we've touched upon it previously. So it would probably be with someone like him, and like seeing how, sure, like in theory that's all great, but how do you do that? How do you keep people motivated after they, win 2 Super Bowls in a row? How do you get them to practice real hard the third year in a row as well?
So maybe you just answered my question in part, but with all the research that you have done, is there anything that jumped out at you, or you were surprised by, or you find particularly inspiring, despite what you just said?
Um, mm, I think it was also very interesting to me because the coaching staff is also so big in the NFL. Defensive, offensive coordinators for each position group. You have a coach, and you have quality control coaches, and a lot of it was just um, surrounding yourself with good people you can trust, and who have the same work ethic, the same attitude, the same like way of seeing things like you do, like being on the same page. I think it's super important, and it's something that I'm gonna have to do, like get some hire like an assistant or two in terms of analysts to help like with scouting opponents, because it's just too much for one man to handle, and there's going to be a lot of work to be done with the team itself. So it's about that it's very important to surround yourself with people you trust, that it can get things done the way you want them to be done, and then having the trust to give them something, and knowing that they're going to do it the right way, and not that you're going to receive, a scouting report or something, and it's going to be, well, now I have to go over this by myself, all over again, really.
Is that something that we might see in Counter-Strike in the near future, having a much bigger coaching staff? Is that attainable, or do you think it's just going to be the way it is now for quite some time?
I think it's definitely going to prop up more and more, because organizations and teams, they're always looking for uh, a new way to gain the edge on their opponents, right? First it was just coaches, then it was psychologists going with the team, this and that, managers and everything else, even having a fitness coach go with you to a tournament, so good lifestyle throughout the tournament. And I think a bigger coaching staff would definitely be the next thing. I think it's a lot of times where you can draw parallels to the NFL. You have offense, defense, CTT side, you have different players, and I think, why would you burden a player too much with telling him, hey, like, look at this demo or look at that, when you can have a guy, an assistant, who can do all of that stuff for him and tell him, listen, on your part of the map, this is how they like to play, this is what you can expect. When you see maybe this Molotov drop down, they're going to do one of the two things, and that just allows players, makes their life a whole lot easier, allows them to focus mostly on playing the game and like on practice, because their schedules are at the moment ridiculous. And I believe if you give them too much to do, they're not going to do a very good job in doing any of it, right? But if you give them a few things to do and they have enough time and it's not too much, and then they can do it properly, and then that's going to be a lot more efficient again, and it's going to be a lot more productive at the end of the day.
All right. Well, I think it's time to start wrapping this up. So one thing I wanted to ask you before we did that is obviously one of the things that comes with the package of joining MIBR is, of course, they are based in LA, and you, up until this point, have been based in Serbia. So how are you looking forward to LA, or is that going to be a difficult aspect of life, having to make that change? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, it will be interesting. I don't think I'm actually going to move this year at all. Like for these 7 weeks, we're in Europe or the tournament in Hong Kong, and sure, after that the online leagues start. But I think I will just, because it's not too long of periods of time. There's going to be tournaments in between again, and all of that stuff. So I think I'm just going to go over there, make the trip for maybe a week or two with the team while we're playing, and then from that we're going to go all together to a tournament. So since the team is still going to play a lot of tournaments, I think the plan is from next season to maybe tone it down a little bit in terms of tournaments and everything. And in that case, it's probably going to be more time in LA just practicing. I think then I would probably have to move if I'm going to be able to do my job properly. And thinking about living in LA, I would, if I wouldn't have to, I would never move out of Serbia. It's a great country to live in. A bit different if you have to earn your living here, but just as a country to chill and live, it's the weather's great, food, people, everything is great basically. But of course, LA is LA, and it's there are worse places to move to if you have to because of your job. So I think it's definitely going to be exciting if or when I have to make that leap. I think it doesn't really matter so much at the end of the day. It's just going to be a lot of work, a lot of travel. That's what I'm going to be focused on a lot, whether I'm in Serbia, LA, Mongolia, wherever I am. It's a lot of tournaments, a lot of travel, a lot of Counter-Strike, and it's still I still have the opportunity to visit. When there's a tournament somewhere in Europe, I can use the 2-3 days in between to just visit, since I'm traveling so much. Even as an analyst, we travel so much that it's not like I get to spend crazy amount of time in Serbia either.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm looking forward to the Korean barbecue, Dan. That's what I can tell you for sure. Korean
Yes.
barbecue, sunny weather all the time, and being able to watch American sports live. That's also pretty fun. Going to games and so on. That's definitely going to be a big plus.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pluses. Well, I think that is about it for now. So thank you very much. I have to say, I can't wait to see MIBR back on top. I think this was definitely the change that was needed. So I'm really excited about it. And thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
No, thanks for having me, Dan. Had a lot of fun talking to you, as per usual.